Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the last fall Holloway reading. And this, during this very troubled and interesting time, we're very pleased to have with us my neighbor, Bob on Grant Street, Bob Perelman. Hey. And he will be introduced by Leo Dunsker. Before Bob reads, John James will read, and John will be introduced by Lydia Liu. And so I'm happy to have everybody here, those four, and everybody else. Happy to be in this in these Zoom boxes with you. This is the last reading of the fall semester. In the spring, there will be 4 other Holloway readings. Watch for the wall posters for the dates of those. There will be Jonah Mixon Webster, Ginger Coe, Julian Brolaski, and Francine Harris. That's the spring. At this moment, I will turn things over to Lydia Liu, who will introduce John James. Lydia, I'm going to mute myself.
Hey, thank you so much, Cecil, and thank you, Jess, for organizing this. It is my great pleasure today to introduce the student reader, John James. A graduate student at the Berkeley English Department, John is the author of The Milk Hours, winner of the Max Ripple Poetry Prize, and a scholar of poetry and poetics, with particular focus on the history of science and ecological thought in the British 18th century. John is also an accomplished digital collagist, whose image text creations have also appeared in various literary magazines. The last fact should not surprise those who have been acquainted with John James's poetry. As someone who has had such a pleasure, I am tempted to describe John James's poetics as one of accumulation and collage. The words in his poems are dense and richly composed, curated by a speaker who is both judicious and relentless in their impulse to notice and to name. This impulse, like that of Robert Hass, one poet whom John has cited as an influence, comes in part from a deep interest in the natural world. In one poem, he writes, "Dawn seethed the day and the gulls fled. I bled my thoughts into a book." Nature, both its ceaseless activity and its endangerment, constantly compels the poet into language. John himself has described his process, quite humbly, as one of gathering. I am compelled by John's poems to contemplate the multiple meanings of gathering. I think of a poet-gatherer, whose subsistence is going out into the world and foraging for wild foods, wild particles of affect and meaning. I think also of a gathering in the poet's mind and ears of these energetic particles, festive and sorrowful, but no longer silent, no longer alone and no longer anonymous. These poems that you will hear resonate with the life of the gatherings that produce them. Naming in John's poems is a form of eulogy, but it is also an anticipatory mourning, for all that we can name has somehow come to an end. The speaker celebrates existence and at the same time laments its inevitable undoing. Quote, "If the road ends, it ends in a lucid motion of dragonflies cutting the air." Later, the speaker realizes, quote, "There never was a road." In these poems, even the interruption of existence is imbued with a painful brilliance, like, quote, "pure light which can make the eyes ache," to borrow some words from Robert Hass. The speaker in John's poems is acutely aware of the impermanence and contingency of all that is alive and all that is not. In these poems, flies gather and disperse, one boat's trail is chopped off by another's, skies are pricked by stars, and a black cedar is severed in its prime. There is no uncomplicated pleasure, not even in the possibilities of language. It is by acknowledging the ever-present pain of loss and absence that the speaker awakens us, perhaps, in one of these unassuming moments to the tenderness of being, that is also being in, that is also being with. On that note, I would like to thank everyone for being here with us today, and please welcome John James.
Thank you so much, Lydia. That was such a kind and ridiculously generous introduction. I really appreciate it. I feel so humbled. So thank you so much. So I'm going to begin with this is probably a horrible idea, but I'm going to begin with the most challenging poem that I plan to read tonight. It's a poem called Clay's Painting. And the reason I say it's challenging is because it draws on a number of lexicons, registers, narrative styles, in order to create very much the kind of sort of collage affect that Lydia is describing. So it's called Clay's Painting, referring to Paul Clay's Angel of History, or Angelus Novus. And it is in part about, in part in the mode of Walter Benjamin. Clay's Painting. It's not bad to have a body. Chicken plucking shells from the dirt, seals at the zoo falling backward, swallowing a herring, shuddering in the late autumn heat. The keyboard of a piano divided into many notes. The world thickens with its texture. The lizard's eye flickers once more. Sometimes, staring back, I fear its relevance. Angelus Novus, print transferred to oil, ruin upon stumbling ruin, a single chain of events, little pile of scribbles. This is the storm we call progress. Sugar maples, the broadness of their leaves, little silver bell, open mouth of blossoms. So many things shiver in the cold. Name, kudzu, genus, Poraria, in the pea family, chokes out native vegetation via heavy shading, used in the south to feed goats. I sit gossiping in the early candlelight of old age, casting backward glances over traveled roads, a perfect catastrophe set into lines, a varied jaunt of years. Leipzig, 1920s, a Jewish university student. Boy with a disposition fragile as his breathing, born to an assimilated upper-class family in the last century of the decade before his own. Bankers and antique traders, factory owners. Grandfather, a successful chemist who fought in the army of the Kaiser, returned home with a box of medals on his chest. The body, no, it's not bad. I am gall, I am heartburn, finch's wings, stalks being pulled from the incinerator. After completing my poems, I am curious to review them in light of their intentions, the 30 years they seek to embody. The painting, the essay, grandfather with his medals, they were well provided for. C. Benjamin, 1940. All right. The next poem I'm going to read is called Catalog Beginning with a Line by Plato. The first line comes from Plato's Symposium. To the feasts of the good go unbidden. Children's hands in snow. Houseboats on the lake, a red and yellow bicycle, the scent of black cedar severed in its prime. When my father died, the nickel wire of my throat collapsed, snapped, twisted in air, hung itself limply from the column of my neck. It's okay to play leapfrog in the yard. In the window sits a lampshade exhausted by light. A man and woman riding home in the dark warm the leather of their seats. A clown-faced wren pecks bark from a pine, jams the acorns in a hole. My mother slices plums on the counter, removes the insides from their skin, steeps lilac in a pot. The bubblegum medicine she hauls from the drawer. I take it from a spoon. This next piece is titled Delaware I-95, and I wrote it on a bus riding through Delaware, if you can believe it, on I-95. And it's pretty quick, so I'm just going to read it. Cattails at lakeside constitute ecologies. Telephone wires dissect the sky, negate the coast's rusted corridor. Purple lupin erupts in the median. The sleeping child on my leg dozes, becomes aware, loses consciousness again. Her cheeks flanked by marshlight, summer's hum, the blue idola of bug guts spattering the windshield in the cold mechanic valence of the lamps along the road, the round oaks rapidly scuttering into the sagged night, where thoughts low and turbid overflow winds in. So I have one pretty straightforward kind of narrative, occasional poem in the book, which I wrote just after the inauguration in 2017, although the poem is called Poem for the Nation 2016. And I thought it's on the one hand a good reminder in this, for most of us, a very jubilant moment, but also with the kind of still cloud of litigation and all the other kind of craziness hanging over us, I thought it'd be worth reading. So it's the last one that I'll read from my book. This is Poem for the Nation 2016. Then I'll turn to a couple of newer poems. When it's a weapon, when it flies, the flag is a striped idea flapping on a pole. It makes a fine cape, my daughter says. She wears it on the 4th. I say the pledge, but never know if I mean it or I don't. The alders bleed. The shot trees on the Capitol lawn bend in the wind. Heat collects in the quarried stone of white buildings. This is what an ailing empire looks like, you say. I agree, watching mallards spin on the Potomac. They paddle on the surface of the reflecting pool, webbed feet beating in assembly, one duck, then another, gathering on the grass before they take flight. In grade school, hands on our hearts, we sang the anthem. Words not a one of us understood. The blasting, bombardments, things I'd never heard or seen. In the cut grass, you kiss me. I take your hand to my lips. We watch the flags at half-mast parade around a white tower. Helicopters hum. Our daughter takes a grape in her hand. You cut it in half. Tell her not to choke. I gulp wine from a cup. Litter in the president's yard. All we ever needed was a start. I probably should have mentioned before reading the poem, I was living in Washington, D.C., both when the election and the inauguration happened, and for a couple of years thereafter. So it was an interesting place to be, interesting time and place to be. Okay, so I'm going to turn my attention to a couple of newer poems. The next couple of ones are a little rougher around the edges, but that's okay. And this one's titled Everything Must Happen, but to Whom It Doesn't Matter. Trout break the surface of the lake. Water eats the cliff's lip, hog fat roaring in a stolid pan warmed by guttering flame. Smoke floats. The blue limbs of tattered conifers frame a sky barred with ribbons of light. Needles on the forest floor tenebrous as leopard spots strung through a thicket of leaves. One boat's slow slur chops another's foamy wake. If the road ends, it ends in the lucid motion of dragonflies cutting the air, cattails heavy in a layered bed of shale. Already I'm staring at my feet, counting out the time it takes the flies to find the center of the meat, mycelium to gather on the substrate of a log. There never was a road. In the pan, the sulfur shelf's bright orange darkens to cinnamon glaze. its tossed caps strewn along the oak's base, big with morning rain. A stone smell drifts off the water. I hear a motor hum. The atmosphere is brimming with the putrid scent of life, its petrichor, its iron, its camphor, and its loam. This next piece is titled Scattering, and it's an unrhymed sonnet, an American sonnet, if you will. Consider once again impressions stamped in the soil of the chest, the shaped absence of a lung, its hollowed out trunk, first swollen, wet, then slack like a limp balloon. A heavy-headed helianthus leans to eat the ground. All week I've watched foxgloves hasten and wither, their leaves go fabulous yellow. The apples bend their tree. A dead bee bedded in the crease of a leaf looks alive in the morning dew. This place is loosely tethered, liquid, uncertain, its nights unbearably cold. Constellations, alas, are light years away. My thoughts are left here, swimming. And the last piece I'll read, I began with Benjamin, and this next piece is titled "The Delusion of Being Absolute," which is a line taken from Adorno's essay, Cultural Criticism in Society. So I thought, begin with Benjamin, I'll end with Adorno. And it's a long poem. I'm just going to read the first section of it. I'm not going to inflict a long poem on you, but here it is. And it is about, on the one hand, it's a poem about the limits and the potential failures of aesthetics and of art production to addressing large-scale social problems. But more specifically, it's about that period, as I'm sure all of you will remember, last fall when PG&E shut off the power, right, for 3 or 4 days at a time. And I wrote it during that time, but that not knowing then that we were going to have, a 8 or 9 month, space of kind of social stillness and social rest. It was kind of oddly prescient in that way. Anyways, this is the delusion of being absolute. Slicing the bellies of cold cod, I watched tankers plow into the bay's mouth, the bridges taut cables glinting in shorelight, the thrust of my locution anchored in addiction to place. I scrawled clipped missives, tucked the envelopes in a sack damp with the accretion of fog. I pined for the web's noetic buzz. In the pit I lit a fire, waited while the flames stripped the dry twigs. Sound bled from the sky's fissured maw. I thought of glaciers calving themselves, noise reverberating over a plain of packed snow. Witness was I to its deletion, its mass relaxing like a cube of ice, softening in a tumbler's throat. In those hours, time distended, flies gathered, then dispersed, the water over mottled rocks repeatedly sloshing, each iteration of its movement modeling an attempt to set the record straight. The weather reports will not absolve us. Hills let the wind in. For a moment, the ocean's surface seemed a sheet of slate, the water itself technically expanding, worsening drought, potentiating flame. To me, there was only stasis, a locked to and fro, by which the variability of the water's shape heaved a single pulse. The day spread. Tull elk chewed the stems peppering the cliff's ridge. Sun struck. Redness smeared the skin of my neck. I seared the fish flesh, listened to the pop of oil as it singed a thyme sprig. Evening cauterized the grasses, simulated fire with its crude light. My lips moved, and the drone of phonemes drowned the day's heat, a signage no less palatable for its investment in monotony. Once, in the supermarket, I combed the stocked shelves, searching the aisles for evidence of vacancy. I found among the varied cans of meat a cornucopia of choice, an emblem of abundance that formed its own dearth. Out of boredom, I listed the ingredients aloud. Their empty polysyllables rattled in my teeth. I'll leave it at that. But Bob, I'm really excited to hear you read. Thanks again to Lydia for that wonderful introduction, and thanks so much to all of you for being here. I really appreciate you listening.
Leo, whenever you're ready.
All right. Well, I've prayed to the gods of fact here, so please forgive me, Bob, if I get anything wrong, and if I do, then maybe you can correct me and we can all learn a thing or two. But here it goes. Bob Perelman begins his remarkably short introduction to his own selected poems as follows. Quote, Walter Benjamin imagined a perfect criticism that would only quote the material that it studied. In trying to write this introduction, I've increasingly felt, I'm still quoting here, the spirit of that desire to get out of the way and let the poems speak, sing, make noise, and so on, end quote. I hope similarly to get my own introduction quickly out of the way and let the poetry speak or sing for itself. Perelman's poetry, of which we have over 20 books at present, in addition to a number of critical works, has proven exemplary in more ways than one since his first magazine publication in 1969. 2 paragraphs from an early book, AKA, published 79, served as the main exhibits in Ron Silliman's essay manifesto, The New Sentence, a document integral to what we've come to call language poetry. Another early work, the poem China, was famously included in Frederick Jameson's postmodernism as a paradigmatic instance of postmodernism's disjunctive and fragmentary aesthetic. It was in these contexts, as examples within texts that themselves are now seen as exemplary, that I first encountered Perelman's poetry. Familiar perhaps even to most of us here, China begins, we live on the third world from the sun, number 3, nobody tells us what to do. And proceeds in a similar vein. I don't want to be too redundant here. But if Jameson's deployment of China gives us a global view of that poem, this is only complemented by a more local account. At a time when the Bay Area's poetry community was galvanized by divisive engagements with new aesthetic strategies and critical idioms, Perelman appears in retrospect like a figure in whom many opposites were reconciled. As the organizer and host of the Talks series in the early 1980s, Perelman opened his Folsom Street apartment as a forum for writers whom it is increasingly voguish to identify with diametrically opposed poetic tendencies. One such poet, Bruce Boone, a pioneer of new narrative mode, singled Perelman out for praise, deploying this poem again, China, as an example and preceding Jameson himself in so doing. So what in the early poetry seems at first blush largely procedural, receptive, and collaborative, or can seem that way, does not dispense with an almost symbolist lyrical density that surfaces at key points. One poem that appears not once but twice in the sequence Cupid and Psyche, contained within Perelman's first book, 7 works, is a favorite instance of mine. It reads in full, I'll embrace my inclination, a soft setup, torn, thoroughly blue, silver white, a hard breathing, winged devouring approaching, thinking, I was in my eyes, end quote. Interiority does not come at the expense of indexing and external detail, nor does oblique reference to this detail obscure its expressive relation to the voice. What comes later in poems like a literal translation of Virgil's 4th Eclogue and the Manchurian Candidate is a more overt and provocative discursive mode, to my ears anyway. One never loses sight of the complex web of material and social relations that, quite apart from the poetry, keeps the reference behind each word in constant tension with each other. What might otherwise appear as social life is here unmasked as, in fact, an emanation of the interconnection of Korea, Ulysses, WD-40, the VCR, bicycles, and perhaps it comes as no surprise, Bob Perelman. where we might expect to find the cosmopolitan or the classic, we are induced to see those centers of trade or administration where everyone's utterances go to die or else to get very lonely. And drawing things to a close, the prevailing tone of Perelman's latest book, Jack and Jill and Troy, requires that we employ all manner of troublesome two-tone words to try to nail it down. Is glib at points or at others blithe. The book belongs to a tradition that looks past the veneer of epic action to its smaller and often sadder underpinnings, one that includes Chaucer's Troilus and Cressida, Shakespeare's Troilus and Cressida, and Jack Spicer's Troilus, I would venture. It is a suitable recirculation, recalling Perelman's extensive education in the Greek and Latin classics. He holds an MA from the University of Michigan, and in precisely this, and coinciding with his return to the Bay after almost 3 decades as professor of English at University of Pennsylvania, where he is now professor emeritus. Please join me in welcoming Bob Perelman.
Gosh, well, thanks, Leo. That was great. Gee, you remember more than some of us, I suppose. Anyway, I want to thank Jessica and Cecil for inviting me, and John. It was great to hear you and Lydia's introduction as well. I'm going to read just a couple of very old things. One even older than what Leo was mentioning. This is from my first book, Braille, Ithaca House Press, 1975. And then I'll read one more early one, then I'll read some Jack and Jill and Troy, and then some newer stuff. So this is, Braille was a series of improvisations. I was inspired by William Carlos Williams's Cora in Hell, and I wrote an improvisation a day and picked the good ones as I thought. So this is The Fortune Teller. You can enjoy the body. You can enjoy the vision of particulars as well, creeping inward through your peeping outward like a snake into home room. You may obtain prompt, accurate motion from your muscles and, with practice, can desire your bones to point the way they do. With practice, it grows on trees. You can't waste it. You're spending it. Is it practical? There's information waiting when you open your mouth to lull the dog, or when you wake up inside the house again. And when you think in the influence of gravity, sinking and rising at the same time, then there's a big kiss forming as you form your lips. So the time is now, the pattern of a lifetime. How meaning flies, roots, okay is your next step. What wild shape. Congratulations. And it was Francie, my wife, who kind of urged me to read some early stuff. So the second early one I'm going to read has her naked in it. So I thought that would be somehow poetic justice. There's not very much of this. You'll have to listen very carefully, but it is there. Okay, it's called A History Lesson, and it is from To the Reader, a 1984 book. A History Lesson. I wonder whether states in United States is a noun or a verb. The clothes of my charmed wife I see before me as the phone rings and rings. In the beginning, to set the record straight, was a mother cooing to a baby. US, what a wonderful audience to put up with all these dead people. Push all the right buttons so we won't get blown up. Give the person back to the baby. The higher the ladder one mounts, canceled. We receive many helpful suggestions every day. The best of luck. On high, money assumes a human look, like a face, that fine line between want and need. Quote, I use my whole doctrinaire vocabulary. Praxis twice as hard and rhetorical as a shotgun in a pickup. Today's date, sigh, a heavily feathered paperweight crammed down the group esophagus for pleasure. Your bored longings, That's how money is manufactured, unquote. A coy little cog beneath the Democratic Party, save the last dance for me, was born and now suspended in a jar of methadone. The United States unite into a fist standing tall. Nothing to do all day but make war. This is not my idea of a place to live. I'm willing to look the text in the face, but am unable not to stay all the way outside, speaking in infuriated detail. I'm a decal, you're a decal, unless Walter Mondale, Sappho, separate the living from the dead, right? If you say so, dead man. So that's back then, and this is now, well, now-ish. So this is from Jack and Jill in Troy, which is born from my late blooming utter enthusiasm for the Iliad, and there's Jack and Jill and nursery rhyme and real life in it as well. So I'm going to start with the keep, and some of it is very Iliad-ish and some is Jack and Jill-ish, and this poem is somehow trying to jam the two together. The keep. Jack and Jill went up the hill to the windy keep of Troy. This was long before apnea set in and all our woe. The keep is where you keep things, things of value, cataloged carefully, no matter whose they used to be, which eventually makes for provenance problems up and down the hill, big ones, little itches dogging you into every enclave, nagging like a summer cold when you're not young, when someone's got what's yours, has it, up on the windy keep, up whatever, the thought roots and won't be budged. That certain someone is getting decimated, him and all his glittering connections. This is something of a retelling of a scene of Aphrodite and Helen, where the goddess of love, Aphrodite, kind of pushes Helen into an erotic encounter. Aphrodite and Helen. It's private what we're talking about, but everybody sees it. The dictionary meaning of the next word is aroused, but don't you think in context, angry makes better sense? Instantly, Helen knew the goddess's neck, her whole being, through the disguise of the old woman, faithful wool carder, the one she loved most back in Sparta. But this was someone quite different, and Helen cut through the disguise, raising her voice to Aphrodite. Listen, I tell you, it enrages me. Each time you get total access to everything I ever felt. You dandle that thin chain hanging from nowhere all the way down to nursing, and then you get to shove me back into the fucking bedroom, and there's the airhead lover fondling his armor, always the same grin each time he sees me. This is called Paganism for Dummies. And okay, I don't think I need to say anything about it. Paganism for Dummies. First lesson. Lessons are for dummies. A life of wake up, you're late for your lesson. Think about it. How many lessons are there going to be? If they're never going to end, what's the point? As opposed to the gods with their, not superpowers exactly, more like an absolutely upper hand, free to appear or not, answer prayers or not, wield special effects, knock down any structure, whisk favorites out of danger. They're on top, superlative beings, never wrong for long. The problem is their names, and of course the toga situation. But the names are bad enough. These days, Zeus only works if you're naming a dachshund, though that's not totally fair. In their enclave, the gods do remain skilled workers, troopers, believable in every scene, now observing from high distances, now throwing their weight around, even getting bent out of shape when it says to in the script, i.e. Zeus weeping over Sarpedon a favorite human son dead, and he weeps bloody tears, real ones. No one else does that. But that's not to say human death on an epic scale teaches the gods anything at all. Far from it. In general, they could care less. It's us getting the hard ones. If you want your son's body back, then you kiss the hand that killed him and drag the corpse around obsessively. You kiss the hand because you need the body, because a funeral is not legitimate without the body. If you learn nothing else, get that through your head. That is referring to the end of the Iliad when Priam, the king of Troy, kisses Achilles' hand to get Hector's body back. Okay, let's see. Oh yeah, bigger than big. Zeus savors the smoke of perfectly spiced barbecue. And when the really nice wine spills on the proper surface, that's also a thing he greatly enjoys. He's way up there, but the scent arrives, full-bodied. Like they say, just because you're already on high, no reason not to get a little high. Sensory bliss. Snort it. And this is called Hera and Zeus at Home, and it's a retelling of an episode where Hera, who is pro-Greek, arranges some tactical sex with Zeus, who is temporarily pro-Trojan because she wants to throw him off his military maneuvers. And this, I think, is the beginning of gods behaving scandalously, and is one reason Plato kicked poets out and thought that that poetry was kind of just scandalously improper. Anyway, this is a retelling of that. Hera and Zeus at home. At this point, Hera thought just how to get what she wanted. She'd aim all his pleasure right back at the father, brother, husband. She'd knock him off his vantage. His wishes were hateful to her. She'd wreck his plan. So she armored up with oils and other irresistibles. She'd already got hold of the love bead and went up the mountain and presented herself like some ingenue, first time in town, micro-fidgeting, hyper-compliant. As for him, never had he felt so alive, so on top of his game. Not when he played badminton with Daphne, solitaire with Lydia, catch the drift with Sue, let's make a deal with Ray, post office with Dawn, rolled that perfect game with Sally. This was like the first time. Even better, it was right before the first time, which was finally going to happen. The cues worked to perfection. The ground literally grew flowers beneath them. The atmosphere candied into a golden fog, so no one outside could really see all that much of anything. Sleep crept out from the branches. Victory was hers, candy from a baby. Then afterwards, when things are a mess, his entire schedule's shot, the beeper won't shut up. That's precisely when she gets to tell him, look, it was just sex. I swear on our marriage bed, don't start. The young know all this. They've been hearing it since forever. But they also know that if you've missed the latest, nothing you know is worth much. That's why screens are sacred and why it's almost physically impossible to look away. Miss something, you're screwed. Oh yeah, okay. This is called Achilles to Priam, and this focuses on that same moment when the king of Troy goes to Achilles to get the body back. And as the book goes on, Troy, which is a cosmopolitan city of a lot of allies where they speak different languages, and it's going to be the losing city. This is all fated, and the audience knows this, but the poem never actually finally narrates the fall of Troy. And as the book goes on, I kind of was thinking as much about New York City as a kind of, you know, trembling in the height of its power and glamour, being at the same time possibly short-lived, etc. So that's the big picture that was vaguely in my mind throughout the book. So Achilles to Priam. At the end of this whole thing, we have to get on the same page. So listen. Yes, I said I'm giving you the body, but just shut up, okay, so I don't kill you, which I know would be exactly the wrong thing to do, and which it turns out is just another thing I am extremely good at, doing the exact wrong thing that gets everybody killed. But yes, the body, like I say, I'm seeing to the necessities, the washing, the oiling, the wrapping. Look, take it. I killed him and couldn't kill him enough, but take it away, go back. 12 free days, I am promising. Go back to your melting pot, all the different food, all those languages. Good luck with that. Like that giant water drop hanging off your penthouse pine, and you're thinking that it's there and life is packed. But surface tension only gets you so far. Leave, go home. 12 days, no war. Take your precious body. Between walls. Down here, when the gods do appear, they're in control. And if situations arise, they've got special effects to make the winning and losing pivot according to the plan, which everyone knows, though it's hard to keep track of all that's happening between the various walls in the contested spaces outside. But everyone already knows how it all turns out. The lofty walled town with the famous keep and the endless scandals burned to the ground. All that foreign noise, but real parenting skills, dense mats of local know-how burned to ash. The unpredictable entirety of that intermeshed information long escaped as smoke. And us, meanwhile, listening to the plan unfolding, the serious back and forth. We almost lose, but of course, because it's in our language, we count ourselves among the victors, even with the insinuating buzz of strangeness. What we hear is ours. But when you get to the end and the city's not yet gone, it's hard to be sure it was them and not us, because what is happening makes it hard to credit there ever was a plan, hard to believe it's not going to be us losing access to everything we know. All right, hang on, next. These little, okay. Yeah, straight off the page. Nothing. This has nothing to do with the Iliad. And there is a little mention of Poe's The Raven. And there is an essay in which Poe describes how he engineered the poem. Straight off the page. And this actually was straight off a notebook page. Off the beaten path and off with our pants, somewhere in a big grass acre in a whole other country. Not to forget, it was in the past, too. In the second place, I remember Poe reverse engineering The Raven, nevermore having the right number and satisfying placement of affecting noises. It really is a great word, if I could stop and think. And speaking of thinking, if thought is tasted in the mouth, then what is happening when the pen tip industriously curves and lip lifts while my lips are sealed? Green open grass clearing and us tucked somewhere in there. Sky still overhead, I imagine. This is Aphrodite Never Old. It's more, it's some related to that earlier poem of Aphrodite and Helen. Aphrodite Never Old. Love of what you are is everything, and love of what you're not is such a stretch that we're hard pressed to escape the taint of the ridiculous. And we have to recognize the power in force, not that we have any choice. We have to listen when this powerful being who loves us so attentively says, watch it, just as I lavish so much on you now, a little later, just as easily, I might not love you much at all. In fact, I might loathe your sagging particulars. Absolutely detest them, darling. So do what I say. Okay. Acknowledgement. Some of these words have appeared in the following places: my mind, tongue, ear, and files, and in the minds, tongues, ears, and files of loved ones, friends, acquaintances, the wide world I've heard and not heard, flyers on the sidewalk, billboards lit and peeling, oceanic screens and private polling places, any other mouth, the ideal location to hear these words, transing, flaunting, sniffing, standing at attention, beaten into twitchy sameness, moodily bowing to the monotonies of the convinced lash. The bodies of these words, stretched out, seemingly endless, but animated, like the green hills lining the freeways in New Jersey or Indiana, half-mile hills 30 feet high, you glide by, and out the windshield, suddenly, there's the dull stub of a small smokestack, a little gray tube stuck in the middle of this next elongated green lump, and then not long after, another one slides behind, each tube expressing its own signature output of the slowly cooking plastic and fatigued newsprint secreted beneath the undulating green hills, off-gassing the invisible news, our sacred intoxicant. Okay, I'm going to read this too. This is an attempt. There's this beautiful image in the Iliad where Andromache is mourning the death of Hector and thinking about her little boy, what's going to happen to him as a defeated exile, and how he's going to tug on old fathers of old friends and ask for a little sip of something, and they'll only let him touch the cup to his lip but never get his tongue wet. It's very beautiful. It's more beautiful than I said just now. Anyway, this is called the Maitre D's Tale. This one mother comes in, going on about her little boy, no future, he'll be handing the winners their drinks, and when he meets the old remnants, they'll be at best a sideways kiss, maybe he gets his lips wet, but nothing to swallow, which you hear out attentively, and then after the proper interval, you bring the menu, like for everybody else. The schedule doesn't shut down just because the sky falls. And since this is your one night, you should remember Troy in the best sense, the swagger of the swoops, the dependability of the connectors, the side-lit mist hovering above the Hudson through the remaining peepholes. You get a quick glimpse of time spread out like a fresh, stiff tablecloth. It is a conscious universe, after all, and you do have reservations. This is called ABCs, and it's thinking about the Iliad in general, how it comes down to us, and also dealing with some of the incredible panoply of violence in the Iliad. ABC, and also the birth of the alphabet. ABCs. There was no need for an Iliad, and there was not enough time to hear the whole thing, but once it existed, or began existing, once the big set of moments, interlocked scenes, arguments, continuity paced, words hammered into shiny rhythmic clumps, short sobering lessons, reproducible tableau, the cast of all-powerful gods, but of course totally human, except all-powerful, which goes without saying. Once all this began happening, and then, though the record skips, nevertheless, the precision is audible and needs to be kept going from mouth to ear to mind to hand, and tracking back with revisions and elisions and everyone's faulty memories, weak links everywhere. The library burns, the equipment obsolescent the minute you take it out of the box. Plus, people are stressed by the ridiculous overbooking, but still the whole poem, gets said and resaid continually into long-term memory, which is why, so long after we've each been weaned into our one-of-a-kind need-to-know outposts, why we still speak in formulas. Be that as it may, eventually one fine day, we finally get to the end of book 4, where the serious killing begins. A kills B, and then as A's friend C goes to seize B's armor, D kills C. General fighting over C's body. And here now is mighty E killing F, crushing him in gruesome detail. And this death prompts G to throw his spear straight at E. But instead of E, it's H, who's instantly shorn of light, its insistent pleasures chopped off, the dependable uploads gone just like that, the huge downloads so automatic. All that change with the one slash stopped for H, who still had so much to think about. And this enrages mighty I, the legitimately famous I, who then, bulging with mania, kills J. J, of all people, that fun-loving nobody, born like us in the midst of the alphabet. Okay, this is called postlude, and it's a weird little joke I tell myself. I took a line from Eliot, that's Gerontian, I think, mixing memory and desire, and I sort of animate memory and desire. Postlude. Afterwards, memory sighed in desire's ear, "Sweetheart, you still awake?" So, okay, don't you finally have to admit that the present gets just plain boring? Tell me about it, sweetheart, broken desire. I know all the novelty, the inertia, everything's such a struggle. The beads of sweat, focus so tight you can't see anything else. What kind of somnambulists do they take us for? Sweetheart, now you're asleep. Insomniacs, suggested memory. I always mean exactly what I say, said desire. Why else take the trouble? No, what I'm saying is these presentists with their foreboding music, then the warriors come striding out. These entrepreneurs must think everybody's always in imminent danger of narcolepsy, and that you can only see when you're being hit over the head, tight focus, dramatic close-ups, organs cut out, sharp angles, sword slashes. They love sword slashes, blades in general, the glints swirling down the surface. And they have to stay inventive, the eyeball on a spear tip, the multiple eyeballs rolling in the dust, the schools of fish flashing up, nibbling the kidney that used to be inside our latest protagonist. Anything to keep us glued because it's the present. Well, memory waiting to make sure nothing more was coming. Well, come on. You know you're the worst insomniac, thrashing around like you do. You keep us both up. Let's see if anything else is on, sighed Desire. If either of us can work these fucking remotes, that is. No, memory counseled. Let's let sleeping dogs lie. Technologies are only out for themselves.
Oh, great. You're doing great.
Okay, two more short ones from the book and then a few new ones. Glass half full. Oh, and this one I put in because it suddenly struck me that I got worried that readers might not know the little poem, Jack and Jill Went Up the Hill. So I quote the whole poem in this poem. I think it's kind of a silly worry, but I worried. Glass half full. They say Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water, without a thought in the world of who might be up there already, involved as they were with each other's detail. To fetch a pail of water, that's the empty bucket swinging, which they're probably taking turns carrying, passing it back and forth, shy at the moment of transfer. When arousal begins, some faculty is sharpened while others are dampened, to repeat what everyone knows. But none of our senses will be reliable guides for what they say happened next. Jack fell down and broke his crown, and Jill came tumbling after. Hardly what you'd call a triumphal second act. Breaking your crown never helps. Rivulets of trauma blotching down the hill, and nothing's going to work the same anymore. But what about Jill tumbling after? No mention in her case of any head trauma, and doesn't tumbling suggest she's something of an acrobat with the ability to accommodate to upside down situations? And doesn't that hold out hope that we can still develop portable scales for weighing unlike things? And this is the last poem in the book, but not, I'm going to read a few more after. Tact in Troy. And here I'm definitely thinking of New York, but I call it Troy. In the early 21st century, we're still finding out about our miraculous powers amid this jumbled crowd of hulking buildings, ton upon ton of exquisitely priced brick, chrome spun almost too fine to see, the entire weight of this exacting knowledge, so easy for our miracle bombs to blow up, which everybody knows, but has presents to get and other friendly things to do because we like each other as much as ever. Okay, that's something for the book. And now, just a couple of new ones. They're almost all quite short. I'll just read them. I don't have too much to say about them. Note to self. The big storm that's blowing in is blowing irony out of the water, so the reader can't make the meaning out of just anything anymore. Nor can the writer say, thanks, that's too much already, which leaves us with nothing to believe in but our lying eyes. And there's going to be two little poems here called To a Raindrop. First one, To a Raindrop. It's one of those if not problems. Don't look down unless you want to be convicted by gravity. And while I've got you on the line, don't you just hate slow-mo? It's an insult to our brevity. God's behaving badly. And this is a stub of a poem that I want to make longer. God's behaving badly. Don't pretend it doesn't happen. And when it does happen, it happens all over, splat in the face. And in particular bodies, time gets shut off. So, okay, there's the moon. Best practices. This is, I've been reading books about acquisition of language, and this is a kind of thinking about that, I suppose. Best practices. The senses touch themselves to what's out there as fast as they can, sorting out what's changing from what isn't. But what you have to remember is Rome was, in fact, built in a day. Opposite of what they say. I know, right? Don't gape. Act like you've been here before. This is an untitled poem. Not only are you allowed to repeat, you have to repeat. Why the long face, said the bartender to the horse. Why the long story, said the horse to Homer. Bilateral symmetry and heart pumping, that's me once you get to know me. So then whose fault is it? And how did we get back here again? Know when to stop, everyone says, but no one ever does. And this is an art tip from Dante. I hear the music of the spheres sounds really great if you have a good seat. And this ends up being a bit of a love poem, I think. Very abstract one, but nevertheless a love poem. Everybody first, then me after, and intermittently, waking, sleeping, etc. Starting, stopping, passing, however you want to say things. Not only don't I mind using the same words as you, I prefer it, just as I prefer you, not to all others, but simply as their thoughtful epitome. Care of the self. Planing with a plane, planning, ego out like a hummingbird tone. Complaining, nobody needs any examples. Explain why you take up the space you do. Include all your hobbies. Enjoy. The Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Don't write anything new and don't say anything old. Let's just agree that the sky is struggling to hold its blue, plus the ice is less spectacularly cold, the ocean not quite as wet, what with all the microplastic creamed through it, the sum of the packaging torn open, churned in the water, the leftovers of the gleam of the new, now occupying its own continent worth of surface, a dull shine when the sun's out. Grammar question. If the past is always getting bigger, then is the future necessarily getting smaller? And whether that's the case or not, why are you always taking it out on me, said the present. Says the present, I should say. A few don'ts. Don't let the data soothe you or your strong skull fool you, your flashy nerves serve you another cup of pleasure. Don't rent out your seconds to the first impulse already cascading through echoes and other special effects. None of these words is native. Every species is invasive. This is everyone's a poet. Isn't always a little overrated and maybe a word that should be polished and placed on the mantle for occasional inspection? Shiny. Always shiny. You've got to give it that. Okay, just three more. Okay, don't forget. There's times the brain wakes up and changes itself in momentary delight, with the air flooding the tongue, never mind the number. And the pen, not to be outdone, skates on the activated space, spelling without thinking, avoiding obstacles as if born for nothing else. But no magic wands, okay? You don't want to be stuck living off Tinkerbell's royalties, waiting for the early bird special. Two more. Self-improvement. Put down your puppet strings and come out with your hands at your sides. Relaxed, bipedal, bicameral, two of everything, mostly. Myriad-mindedness, there you go. The rest is up to you. And the last one is to a raindrop. To a raindrop. Sorry you have to leave so soon and I don't even know your name. I know there are lots of you, but there's only one you, if you know what I mean. I know the smoke you're carrying, sulfuric acid, heavy metals, atomized industrial powders, but still, here's my tongue. A deal's a deal. Okay, thanks. So good. Now what? That's it. Oh, can't go to a bar.
Yes, in the old days, before the plague, you know, the readers, the introducers, and Jess and myself, you know, would all go out and eat and drink maybe a little bit too much and talk wonderfully. And sometime I hope we'll do that again.
Really?
Yeah, those are the old days. There's good places here, as you know.
Yes.
And both of you, John and Bob, in different ways, you've made locations and situations very lively and extremely present. And I want to thank you both for that. And I thank Leo Dunsker and I thank Lydia Liu for also being incredibly present and precise and fun. I'll urge all of you to visit Mo's. There's a link to Mo's books on your invites, and you know, buy some books. I'm reminded that for a minute, a long time ago, back in the 70s, Bob and I had the same publisher.
Yes. Ithaca House Press.
Mr. Hathaway. And
There we go.
yeah, so hang out for a few minutes and talk to the poets, talk among yourselves.